October 12th, 1984. Brighton, England. At the luxurious Grand Hotel, Britain's entire political elite had gathered. 150 people, led by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. After a grand dinner reception, everyone retreats to their rooms. Then, at exactly 2:54 a.m., a massive explosion rips through the building. The hotel crumbles to rubble. 5 people are killed, dozens more are injured. But the main target, the Prime Minister, survives and vows revenge. The attack is carried out by the Irish Republican Army, a group that has fought for over a century to free Ireland from British rule. But who are they really? Terrorists or freedom fighters? This is an army without a state, one that collected its own taxes and crafted homemade weapons from gas cylinders and sewer pipes. IRA fighters didn't hesitate to kill members of the royal family. They planted bombs in the heart of London, but they always called ahead, warning rescuers before the explosions. Today I'll explain why there are 2 Irelands, how many Irish people starved to death in British prisons, and how terrorists from around the world helped the IRA. I'm going to tell you the story of Ireland's fight for independence, as if it all happened yesterday. The conflict between Ireland and England had been going on for over 800 years. These are neighboring countries with a lot in common, but their relationship not so great. And it all started with conquest. In 1171, English King Henry II conquered part of Ireland. The land was home to the Celts, who didn't take kindly to outsiders. They fought back, sparking centuries of conflict. The Irish rebelled, the English crushed uprisings and tightened control, and the cycle repeated. By the 16th century, a new problem emerged: religion. England had turned Protestant, while the Irish remained Catholic. Now it wasn't just a fight over land, it was a fight over faith. In 1800, England decided it was time to tame Ireland once and for all. That's how the Act of Union came about. Ireland became part of the United Kingdom. Great Britain as we know it was born with its famous flag. The Irish Parliament was dissolved, and Ireland got 100 seats in the British Parliament, about 15% of the total. But in reality, they had almost no influence over politics. Half a century later, Ireland was hit by a massive famine. The country's staple crop, potatoes, rotted in the ground due to disease. Meanwhile, food continued to be exported to England. To get any food, the British forced the Irish to do grueling work on public projects. The logic? Why send food to an island if the Irish couldn't afford to buy it? Help had to be earned. Over 4 years of famine, 1 million people died. Another 1.5 million fled, mostly to the United States. Ireland's population dropped by 25%. Entire villages emptied. Every Irish family that survived had its own horrific story of British cruelty. This fueled the desire for independence. But the big question remained: how? By force or peacefully? Initially, Irish politicians tried the second option. They started pushing for Irish autonomy within the UK, known as Home Rule. They used parliamentary walkouts and boycotts as their main tools. The movement gained momentum. In 1905, journalist Arthur Griffith founded the Sinn Féin Party, meaning we ourselves. Its goal? Irish independence. But first, at least, they needed autonomy. Different versions of the Home Rule Act were blocked in the British Parliament for 30 years. By 1912, it was back on the table. But not everyone in Ireland was happy about it. A large portion of the population in the north, Ulster, didn't want autonomy. Mostly Protestant settlers, they were brought over from England and Scotland in the 16th century to push out the Celts. They wanted to stay with Britain. That's why they were called Unionists. Unionists formed armed guards to defend their stance. Those in favor of autonomy responded in kind, raising their own militias. Finally, in 1914, the Home Rule Act for Ireland was passed. It allowed for a separate Irish parliament. Most of the island rejoiced, while the Unionists prepared to protest. A civil war could have broken out, and without London's intervention, nothing would have resolved itself. But Britain had bigger problems at the time: the First World War. Irish politicians got tricked again. The Home Rule Act was passed, but it wasn't in effect yet. It was supposed to come into play after World War I. Unionists, on the other hand, were reassured the Home Rule wouldn't apply to them. So, the North stayed with Britain. No one wanted to wait, and on April 24, 1916, Irish independence fighters launched a rebellion in Dublin. They seized several government buildings and declared the Irish Republic with Dublin as its capital. London quickly mobilized troops to crush the uprising. The fighting lasted a week. The British brought in artillery and bombarded central Dublin. The Irish rebels numbered less than 1,000, facing 16,000 British soldiers. In the end, the rebels were defeated. 15 leaders of the uprising were executed, and anyone suspected of involvement was thrown in prison. No one dared protest for the next 2 years. But in the December 1918 elections, the Sinn Féin party won most of the Irish seats in the British Parliament. They didn't go to London, though. Instead, the elected Sinn Féin members gathered in Dublin, and on January 21, 1919, set up a separate Irish Parliament, the Dáil Éireann, which declared Irish independence. Britain, of course, didn't recognize this independence. The war began. Ireland needed a way to defend itself against the British. That's how the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, came to be. It was mainly made up of soldiers with World War I experience. Michael Collins became the army's leader. Eamon de Valera, a former political prisoner, organized the Irish government. Everyone knew that facing the British army in open battle was a suicide mission, so they chose guerrilla warfare instead. The IRA fought in small units, launching surprise attacks on British forces and police. It worked. 2 years of war exhausted Britain, already weakened by World War I. In 1921, the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed. Ireland gained self-government and the status of a dominion in the British Empire, the same status Canada and Australia had at the time. Part of the IRA, led by Collins, supported the treaty, seeing it as a step towards full independence. Eamon de Valera was firmly against it. For him, compromising with Britain was a betrayal of centuries of Irish struggle. These disagreements led to a split and a civil war in Ireland. The war didn't last long. The supporters of the Anglo-Irish Treaty won. Michael Collins died during the Civil War. Now, Ireland was independent, but divided. The northern part of the island, Ulster, stayed with Britain, with Belfast as its capital. De Valera didn't accept this. He left Sinn Féin and founded his own party, Fianna Fáil. In 1932, it won the elections peacefully. De Valera gradually began changing the laws. By 1937, thanks to him, a new constitution was adopted, declaring Ireland an independent democratic state, though the world hadn't recognized it yet. Ireland officially claimed the entire island. After World War II, it broke its remaining ties with Britain. Finally, on April 18, 1949, the Republic of Ireland was officially recognized worldwide, even by Britain. But its creation only made the island's problems even more complicated. So, who lived in Northern Ireland and what did they want? The population was deeply divided. On one side were Catholics, mostly Irish, who dreamed of a united Ireland. On the other side were Protestants, descended of English and Scottish settlers who wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom, and somehow these two communities had to live together. Protestants were the majority, controlling local government, banks, and the police, while Catholics were often denied jobs just for being Catholic. So, in Northern Ireland, there were two groups that couldn't reconcile on three issues: religion, Catholics versus Protestants; nationality, Irish versus British; and politics, Republicans versus Unionists. In other words, Irish Catholic Republicans were at odds with British Protestant Unionists. The IRA hiding underground supported the Catholics. They never stopped fighting. During World War II, part of the organization even contacted Hitler, hoping he would help resolve the Irish question. After the Republic of Ireland gained independence, freedom fighters didn't lay down their arms. For them, Northern Ireland was still occupied territory that had to be liberated at any cost. Officially, the Irish government didn't support the IRA, so they lacked resources for open confrontation with the British. That's why the IRA chose guerrilla warfare. IRA militants carried out attacks, planting bombs in police stations, ambushing British soldiers, and more. In 1956 alone, Ulster saw 600 attacks on English and local Protestant targets. The Protestants started defending themselves. In Belfast, the Ulster Volunteer Force was formed, led by former soldier Gusty Spence. In April to May of 1966, this group threw Molotov cocktails at homes, schools, and businesses owned by Catholics. Then they made an official statement. From this day on, we declare war on the Irish Republican Army. Known IRA members will be executed without mercy. We solemnly advise politicians to refrain from speeches about reconciliation. We are armed to the teeth Protestants devoted to our cause. By the late 1960s, Catholics, tired of oppression, took to the streets. On August 24, 1968, the first Civil Rights March took place. But Northern Ireland authorities banned such marches in Derry. When protesters ignored the ban, police surrounded and beat them. Over 100 people were injured. Protestants didn't stay silent and organized their own marches. On August 12, 1969, another march took place in Derry. Pro-British supporters marched throughout the city. They planned to pass through the Catholic Bogside neighborhood. The local Catholics weren't about to let them through quietly. A fight broke out. The police tried to intervene, but quickly lost control. People threw stones, bottles, and even Molotov cocktails at each other. Residents of Bogside called on Catholics from across Ulster to come help. Many answered the call. The neighborhood became a fortress that even police couldn't enter. Over 15,000 people built barricades and armed themselves with steel rods and wooden sticks, declaring they wouldn't let Protestants enter. A local activist painted a now legendary message on a black wall. You are now entering free Derry. Britain sent troops into Bogside, which gave the IRA free rein. For years, the IRA hadn't carried out major attacks, but Derry changed that. However, not everyone was ready for fighting. The IRA split into the official and the provisional. The official IRA rejected violence, focusing on the political struggle for Northern Ireland's independence. The provisional IRA, on the other hand, was ready for harsh methods. From now on, when I mention the IRA, I'm talking about the provisional faction, just to avoid confusion. In short, Catholic protests spread across Ulster. Derry and Belfast became almost uncontrollable. Certain areas known as no-go zones were fully under rebel control. Thanks to the IRA, Catholics now had automatic weapons and rifles instead of just stones and bottles. The British temporarily retreated. Protestants didn't lag behind and strengthened their own units too. In 1971, they formed the Ulster Defence Association to fight the IRA. That year alone saw 1,700 shootings between the IRA and its opponents, and over 1,000 bombings. 43 British soldiers died. By the end of 1971, Derry had 29 barricades. British armored vehicles couldn't pass 16 of them. All no-go zones were controlled by either the provisional or the official IRA. People lived separate lives there. Food and medicine were smuggled in from the Republic of Ireland. Instead of the police, IRA fighters maintained order, patrolling streets, fighting looters, and even settling disputes between neighbors. Britain tried to intervene, sending more and more troops, but this only fueled the fire. The UK government sent an elite unit to Derry, the 1st Battalion Parachute Regiment. These guys were experienced soldiers, but completely unprepared for urban street fights with ordinary civilians. London couldn't afford to lose Northern Ireland, but how far could it go to keep it? That became tragically clear on January 30th, 1972, a date now known worldwide as Bloody Sunday. A peaceful civil rights march was taking place in Derry, calling for rights and Irish freedom. Suddenly, paratroopers blocked the protesters' path. Tension escalated. Someone threw a bottle, someone a stone. The soldiers responded with gunfire. Panic erupted. People ran, fell, tried to hide. When it was over, 13 lay dead. The youngest, just 17. Another later died in the hospital. The British government denied the soldiers were at fault, claiming they acted in self-defense. The Irish, who had previously hesitated, now rallied behind the IRA. The army gained many volunteers. Almost immediately, they made an aggressive declaration, vowing to fight the British occupiers to the very end. Not just in Ireland, but also on English soil. And so began the bloodiest period of the conflict, the Troubles. On January 21st, 1972, the phones at Belfast's emergency services were ringing off the hook. Unknown callers reported dozens of planted bombs and gave rough estimates of when they would explode. They asked that civilians be cleared out from those areas. There were so many calls, not everyone took them seriously. But soon, 20 bombs went off across the city in rapid succession. The IRA had carried out a massive attack. 9 people died, 130 were injured, 77 of them women and children. This became known as Bloody Friday, a response to the Bloody Sunday in Derry. And the attack's organizers hadn't intended for so many casualties. Brendan Hughes, one of the IRA commanders, thought the assault had gone too far. "I was the operations officer during this mission. I remember when the bombs started going off. I stepped outside and thought, this is too much. Either the British couldn't handle that many bombs, or they let them happen on purpose to justify their next moves. I'm sorry Bloody Friday happened. Really sorry." 10 days later, Operation Motorman began. 22,000 soldiers rolled into Ulster in armored vehicles. As they moved through Derry and Belfast, the IRA chose not to engage, and the day before the operation, they left the cities. On July 31st, 1972, Derry's no-go zones shook with activity. British troops in bulldozers and armored vehicles tore through barricades. Infantry followed behind. By the end of the day, the no-go zones were gone. Casualties included a 19-year-old IRA member and a 15-year-old local Catholic boy mistakenly shot when he stepped out to watch the tank convoy. For the first time in years, the British Army had full control over Northern Ireland's major cities. Mass searches and arrests began. Soldiers raided Catholic homes, turning everything upside down in search of weapons or IRA connections, often without any official orders. Hundreds were detained without trial in special camps. They weren't allowed to call family or lawyers. Harsh interrogation techniques known as the 5 techniques were used against Irish civilians. Denied food and water, deprived of sleep for 3 to 7 days, subjected to hours of loud noise, forced to stand in uncomfortable positions to strain muscles and joints, bags placed over their heads cutting off light, left in dark, silent cells for days. These techniques broke people both physically and mentally. But the British crackdown backfired. Instead of quelling resistance, it only strengthened it. Meanwhile, the IRA didn't stop planting bombs in city areas. By the end of 1972, roughly 500 people had died in attacks. The IRA had a particular style. Callers would warn about a bomb an hour in advance, as during Bloody Friday, justifying attacks in crowded areas. But police often couldn't respond in time. They only gave approximate bomb locations, making rescue efforts even harder. Even though Protestants had less firepower than the IRA, they were preparing attacks too. On October 31st, 1972, Halloween, they planted a bomb in Belfast's Benny pub, a popular Catholic hangout. 2 little girls, 6-year-old Paula Strong and 4-year-old Claire Hughes, were dressed as witches and playing outside with friends. They met a man who asked them for directions to the pub and gave them a coin as a tip. Both girls followed him, hoping to find more generous people inside, but as they reached the door, a 45-kilogram bomb went off. The building was destroyed. Paula Strong died instantly, and Claire Hughes was rushed to the hospital but didn't survive. 12 more people were injured. Politicians, including members of Sinn Féin, saw that the situation was spiraling out of control. They wanted to negotiate and finally end the violence. The British and Irish governments came together to make peace. This led to the Sunningdale Agreement. Now, Protestants and Catholics could share power in governing the country. But the agreement collapsed almost immediately after being signed. Politicians couldn't control the fighters. Protestants feared it was the first step towards a united Ireland, which they absolutely opposed. The IRA saw it as a betrayal and continued their bombings. In 1973 to 1974, the Irish moved their terrorism to England. First, 2 car bombs went off in London's Old Bailey, near the Central Criminal Court. Later, a bomb exploded near the British Parliament. The most symbolic attack, however, happened at the Ideal Home exhibition in 1974. It showcased what a perfect home of the future would look like. See how everyone will live comfortably. But Britain was going through rough times. Maintaining troops in Northern Ireland and ramping up security across the country cost a fortune. Annual expenses reached £3 billion. With economic struggles, people didn't take the Ideal Home exhibition seriously. The IRA used this to their advantage. On March 27, 1976, they planted a bomb in a trash can outside the exhibition building. It exploded at 4:40 p.m. By then, the exhibition was over. The timing was deliberate to limit casualties, yet 85 people were still injured. This attack sent a clear message. The IRA could strike anywhere in Britain. In the trash can, a darkly ironic nod to the ideal home of the future in England. The IRA realized that a quick victory over Britain wasn't going to happen. So, they changed their strategy, shifting to a long, drawn-out war, soldier by soldier. Their main goal? Exhaust the British Army and wear down the people. Meanwhile, the official IRA, which had long abandoned violence, finally laid down its arms and rebranded as the Workers' Party of Ireland. They didn't want their name associated with thousands of terrorist deaths. But the Provisional IRA kept up the armed struggle, and to fight effectively, they needed clear rules. That's how the Green Book came about, essentially the IRA's Bible. This secret manual, written by Irish militants from 1922 to 1969, detailed the organization's goals and strict rules for its fighters. The Green Book was never mass-printed. Copies were passed hand to hand. New recruits had to memorize it, then destroy it. Joining the IRA was a serious step. Recruits took an oath pledging full loyalty and readiness to follow any orders. They had to fully understand the risks: arrest, death, torture. The Green Book taught them how to handle interrogations, protect IRA secrets, and plan operations. Probably the best advice? Say nothing. Idle talk can cost lives. In a taxi, on the phone, in clubs and bars, at football matches, at home with friends, anywhere. Whatever you say nothing.
The first rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club.
The IRA was run by a military council, including the chief of staff, the finance officer, the intelligence head, and a few top militants. This council made the big decisions and oversaw brigades across all regions, about 5,000 fighters in total. The most famous brigades were in Belfast and Derry. So, where did the IRA get the money to operate? They had a lot of help. Much of it came from the Irish community in the States. These were immigrants who had left Ireland due to famine and war. Some became businessmen, politicians, or even mobsters, secretly supporting the IRA. They bought weapons in America and shipped them to Northern Ireland on small boats. There were other, less obvious ways to fund the organization. The IRA also engaged in robberies and smuggling. They controlled entire neighborhoods and cities, collecting a sort of tax from local businesses. The IRA also collaborated with the Palestine Liberation Organization, buying weapons and sending fighters to train in Palestinian camps. Another ally was the Basque nationalist group, ETA, in Spain, fighting for their region's independence. They supplied weapons and treated wounded IRA fighters. Another supporter? Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi, who provided the IRA with Semtex explosives, more powerful than any other bomb in their arsenal. And the most unexpected ally? The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, who traded cocaine. Officially, the IRA opposed drugs, but some members turned a blind eye in exchange for resources to fund their war. With all these resources, the IRA could raise about $50 million a year. Interestingly, even with money in hand, they continued to craft homemade weapons. They developed a whole series of improvised mortars. The most notorious, the Barrack Buster. It could fire up to 300 meters, built from cut-down gas cylinders and ordinary fertilizer as gunpowder. The mortars were remotely controlled. Fighters could set them, program the launch time, and leave safely. Then the IRA went even further, creating a grenade launcher from steel pipes and tin cans. It fired thanks to an electronic trigger, and the projectile was a regular tin can packed with Semtex explosives. By the late 1970s, the IRA had planned some of the most complex and painful operations against the British. On August 27, 1979, they carried out one of the war's deadliest attacks. The target? Lord Louis Mountbatten, uncle of Prince Philip, husband of Queen Elizabeth II. Mountbatten was a respected military figure and the last viceroy of India. That summer, he went fishing off the Irish coast. The IRA planted a remote control bomb on his boat. The explosion destroyed the vessel, killing Mountbatten, his 14-year-old grandson, and 2 others on board. That same day, the IRA struck again, near Warrenport in Northern Ireland. They ambushed a column of British soldiers. First, a bomb stopped the convoy. When the soldiers exited their vehicles, Irish snipers opened fire. Then a second bomb went off. 18 British soldiers were killed, the largest single-day loss for Britain in the war. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher called the attacks cold-blooded murders and promised to do everything possible to destroy the IRA. In the early 1980s, British intelligence shifted tactics. They started recruiting agents from within the Irish community. These turncoats were called supergrass. They'd betray their friends to the police, often in exchange for freedom or money. It all began with the arrest of Christopher Black in 1981. Black testified against 38 people, leading to their convictions. By August 1983, his testimony alone landed 22 IRA members in prison for a total of over 4,000 years. During this period, 25 more informants came forward, helping lock up 600 Catholics and Protestant militants. Their numbers were staggering, but the tactic didn't last. Most convictions were eventually overturned because some of the informers had lied to get rewards or freedom. Despite these releases, hundreds of IRA members were still behind bars. They faced especially harsh treatment. The British treated them as ordinary criminals, not political prisoners like before. Prison authorities worsened conditions and even encouraged beatings and humiliation. In response, imprisoned IRA members refused to wear prison uniforms. Instead, they wrapped themselves in blankets and stayed that way all day. When this blanket protest didn't work, they escalated to the dirty protest, refusing to wash and smear their own waste on the walls of their cells. That didn't work either, so they chose a new tactic: martyrdom. In 1981, Mays Prison saw a mass hunger strike by IRA members. They demanded to be restored to political prisoner status, which came with softer conditions than ordinary criminals. Leading the protest was Bobby Sands, an IRA militant who had been behind bars for 5 years. He decided that other prisoners should join the hunger strikes gradually to maximize public attention, and it worked. International media pressured Margaret Thatcher to meet their demands, but the Iron Lady stood firm. During the strike, Bobby Sands was elected to the British Parliament as a member of the Sinn Féin party. Graffiti of his face began appearing across Irish cities. He became a folk hero. But on May 5, 1981, after 66 days without food, Bobby Sands died. Soon after, 9 other strikers would follow. Sands' funeral turned into a massive demonstration. 100,000 people took to the streets of Belfast. Margaret Thatcher called Sands a common criminal, blaming him for his own death. On top of that, she announced her Ulsterization policy, supporting the Protestant population of Northern Ireland, who despised the IRA. Various Protestant organizations got more freedom and weapons. Violence against Catholics flared up again on the streets. Thatcher was playing with fire. On October 12, 1984, the IRA hit back. They targeted the Grand Hotel in Brighton, where the UK Conservative Party conference was taking place. The bomb was triggered remotely, destroying several floors of the hotel. 5 people were killed, including a member of Parliament and his wife, and 31 others were injured. Thatcher herself survived by a miracle. Her reaction shocked many. She barely acknowledged the attack. She gave a speech just hours after the blast, barely mentioning the bombing. The attack was meant to frighten or kill members of the government. It failed. We will carry on as normal. The IRA mocked her in response. Thatcher will now understand that Britain cannot occupy our country, torture our prisoners, and shoot our people in the streets with impunity. Today, luck wasn't on our side, but remember, we only need her to smile once. You'll have to be lucky every time. Give Ireland peace, and there will be no more war. The clash with Thatcher marked the IRA at the height of its notoriety. Every year, the organization grew more ruthless and reckless, and it hurt their reputation. On November 8, 1987, came the Remembrance Day bombing. In the small town of Enniskillen, people had gathered at a war memorial to honor those lost in World War I and II. It was Sunday morning, and then a bomb planted by the IRA exploded. 10 civilians and 1 soldier were killed. 63 more were injured. Even for the IRA, it was too much. Irish people had also fought in the world wars. For the first time in years, the organization immediately apologized, calling it a mistake. Meanwhile, Sinn Féin in the 80s began negotiating with the British government, but no compromises could be reached. So, militants kept up the terror. In 1991, the IRA struck boldly again. On February 7th, they fired on the British Prime Minister's residence on Downing Street. Using the same homemade mortar, shells landed in the residence garden while a cabinet meeting was in progress. No one was hurt. By 1992, bombings in London were happening weekly. The city lived in constant fear. Trash bins, favorite spots for IRA bombs, disappeared from streets. People eyed unattended bags and packages with suspicion. Negotiations resumed slowly, dragging on until March 20th, 1993. That day, 2 explosives hit an English city. The IRA planted bombs on a busy shopping street. 56 pedestrians were injured. 2 children died. 3-year-old Jonathan Ball and 12-year-old Tim Perry. They had gone into a store to buy Mother's Day cards. These weren't the first children killed by the IRA. But after 20 years of non-stop terror, each new victim fueled growing anger. The Warrington tragedy wiped out public support for the IRA. Among the outrage was a young Irish woman, Dolores O'Riordan, lead singer of the Cranberries. Inspired by the boys' deaths, she wrote the song Zombie, which you've probably heard. Today it has over 1.5 billion views on YouTube. The song included the line, "It's the same old theme since 1916. It references the Eastern Rising, when the modern conflict began. Zombie is someone who's lost their humanity, someone who sees only the target, oblivious to the fact that their victims are ordinary people. By the end of 1993, after all the horrors of the war, both sides finally came to an agreement. On December 15th, they signed the Downing Street Declaration. It stated, "The people of Northern Ireland had the right to decide their own future. All paramilitary groups would disarm. Political prisoners would be released." At this point, it wasn't full-blown peace. It was just a search for something that everyone could live with. But right after the declaration, the IRA announced a ceasefire. Negotiations continued, but every time a new terrorist attack kept getting in the way. Some Catholics and Protestants were still blowing each other up. Inside the IRA, arguments erupted. Some fighters agreed to stop the war. Others believed that nothing could be achieved except by force. That's why in 1997, the Provisional IRA accepted Britain's terms. And from them, a splinter group broke off to form the real IRA. Its leaders were the McKevitt couple, Michael and his wife Bernadette. She, by the way, was the sister of Bobby Sands, the same man who died on hunger strike. And she couldn't imagine ever negotiating with the British, who had killed her brother. On April 10, 1998, the Provisional IRA signed the Belfast Agreement, also called the Good Friday Agreement. It officially agreed to stop the war and hold a referendum on Northern Ireland's future. The era known as the Troubles had finally ended, but nobody had made peace with the newly formed real IRA. So they planted a bomb in a red car in the center of Omagh. This photo was taken just before the explosion. The camera was later recovered from the rubble. The man and the child in the photo survived, luckily, but not everyone was so fortunate. As usual, the IRA called in a warning before the blast, but this time, the warning was wrong. Police tried to evacuate people and accidentally led them straight to where the bomb was. People ended up in the blast's epicenter. The explosion tore off storefront facades and rooftops. 29 people died, including children and a pregnant woman. The youngest victim, a little girl, was just a year and a half old. In addition, 220 people were injured. 3 days later, the real IRA admitted it had carried out the attack, but claimed it didn't intend to kill civilians. The fighters apologized and announced a halt to all operations. Sinn Féin and the Provisional IRA condemned the attack. The governments of the UK and Ireland responded with tougher anti-terror laws and increased police powers. A new wave of raids and arrests began. Terror was back again. The real IRA wasn't ready to give up. In 2000, they declared total war against the British. But by then, both the Irish and the British were so exhausted that the announcement made almost no sense. Attacks dropped because fewer people were willing to carry them out. In 2005, the Provisional IRA publicly laid down their arms in exchange for freedom. That chapter of history finally ended. In 2012, the remaining anti-peace militants united to form the new IRA. Just like before, they wanted Northern Ireland completely separate from the UK. But this new IRA looked more like ordinary street criminals hiding behind a higher cause. They claimed responsibility for several attacks on police and military personnel. In 2023, they tried to disrupt President Joe Biden's visit to Belfast, but failed. Today, there are no explosions on the streets of Britain or Ireland, but the families of victims still remember the war. In 2010, a 12-year-old investigation into Bloody Sunday, when British soldiers shot civilians, finally concluded. The Army's actions were ruled unjustified. Then Prime Minister David Cameron officially apologized on behalf of the government. A June 2010 poll showed 70% of Irish citizens accepted Cameron's apology, but no one has been punished for those shootings. In 2015, the Bloody Sunday investigation continued. Police in Northern Ireland arrested a former soldier involved in the shootings. He was referred to as Soldier F, then 66 years old. Later, he was released on bail. His colleague, Soldier G, was also called in for questioning. 4 years later, Soldier F was formally charged with 2 counts of murder. Soldier G had already died of old age. It wasn't until June 2024 that Soldier F finally stood trial in Belfast. The case alone is 125,000 pages long. A lot of scrutiny arose from this. Did it really matter after all this time? Northern Ireland remains part of the UK, but the borders on the island have vanished. The past is now remembered mostly through murals and building paintings, which have become iconic symbols of Northern Irish cities. And then came a new problem: Brexit. The UK's decision to leave the European Union reopened old wounds. The Republic of Ireland stayed in the EU, while Northern Ireland left with London. Most people in Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU, but the island was officially split again. Only in recent years has this issue been partially resolved, easing border controls. The war in Northern Ireland claimed over 3,500 lives. That's 2% of the population of Ulster. More than 100,000 people were injured. Compared to other wars, it might not seem huge, but for tiny Northern Ireland, it's devastating. To put in perspective, if the United States lost 2% of its population today, that would be 7 million Americans. Were these sacrifices really justified? A 2022 poll of IRA supporters found that 69% believed that there was no other choice but to fight the British. But what about you? What's your take on this? We'd like to hear from your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more. Thanks again for watching. This was yesterday. We'll see you next time.